Howdy BHRCers. You can find every episode of Why People on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcast content. On this Why People episode number 18, we'll talk to Kelley Boucher, the CHRO at Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Kelley is a super passionate CHRO with a fascinating path to the top HR and people seat. Stay tuned. All right, hello and welcome to another episode of Why People, a BHRC production. For those new listeners, the Boston HR Council is one of the largest HR and people executive communities in the world, with just under 1,500 HR executive council members. Excited to introduce co-founder of the BHRC and co-host of Why People, Paul Roberts.
Thank you, Sean. Good day to everyone. I'm very excited for one of my favorite BHRC council members today. Should be a great podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. We're thrilled to introduce Kelley Boucher, who is the CHRO at Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Kelley, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Sean. Hi, Paul. Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Super excited. Thanks for joining us. And Kelley, I know you've heard a few of these, and we really kind of keep the same cadence relative to conversation. Of course, everyone's so uniquely different in their journey, so it turns out to be a different story, of course. So let's just jump right into it, if you don't mind. Maybe, help us kind of set the foundation for the conversation here. Tell us a little bit about, about your early life relative to schooling or kind of where you started this journey into the HR executive world.
Sure. I'm happy to. Well, I'll start, fairly far back, actually. I grew up in a very small town in Vermont, 2 parents, mom, dad, and a brother. And we were a very big athletic family. So I grew up playing ice hockey, field hockey, softball, and any kind of ball or stick I could get my hands on. And it was a big part of my life. And my parents were pretty strict and held pretty high expectations for the both of us. And I ended up going away to high school on an athletic type of scholarship, and then carried that through and went to Cornell University and played both varsity field hockey and varsity ice hockey at Cornell. In addition to that, I was on a scholarship there as well. So I had to do philanthropy, and I had to have a job, and I had to have a certain grade point average. So it was a busy time, and a time where I very much learned how I needed to manage myself and my time to get a lot of different things done. There certainly wasn't a whole lot of sitting in the rec room watching TV for me. And I so appreciated that. I loved being so busy and have such responsibilities in college. And again, it probably kept me out of a little bit of trouble, and certainly focused myself. When I graduated and was looking to come to Boston after college, I was really questioning what I wanted to do. I was a government affairs major in college. I expected to be a lawyer. That was my plan, to take a couple of years off and then go back to law school. And when I took a step back and thought, what really drives me? What am I good at? What do I think I can both, contribute to and bring value to? I think about it in the context of sport, quite frankly. You have your leadership, if you will, your coaches. So your leadership, they set the tone, they inspire, they set the strategy, and they make sure they have the right players in the right roles on the field at the right time. And they're constantly, adjusting and navigating and helping the folks on the field. So kind of like your employees, right? The players on the field executing the strategy, helping them be the best that they can be in terms of the combination of talent, the strategy on, the design of your plays or whatnot. And so I've always kind of thought about it in that way coming into what my career may be. And so human resources just made a tremendous amount of sense to me. We're talking leadership, we're talking strategy, we're talking people and talent, we're talking organizational design. And those were all things I felt very familiar with, having been so involved in sports my whole life. And so I was fortunate enough to get into a company called Digitas, this was about 2000. And Digitas was kind of a hot AdCom company at the time. And I was very fortunate to get in on the recruiting side of the house. And I had an incredible mentor there at Digitas who made it very clear to me right off the bat that, in HR or in recruiting, any part of HR, if you don't truly understand your business, then you're not going to have the credibility that you need to advise and to influence and to have the impact that you want to have. So she literally, at that point, we were recruiting for a bunch of software engineers. She put this software engineering dictionary on my desk and was like, read that inside and out. And only until you know some of that will I actually let you do the job of recruiting, talk to candidates, talk to hiring managers, et cetera. And so I was taught early on by a great boss and mentor at Digitas how important it is in an HR function to really understand your business, your strategy, your technology, your financials. And that's always stuck with me. At that point, I'd been at Digitas for a couple of years, and I was, reading everything I could read, Boston Business Journal, Globe, and it was becoming increasingly clear to me that looking across the river over in Cambridge, there were some pretty spectacular things happening from, a medicine standpoint, from a biotech industry basically blooming at that point over in Kendall Square and beyond in other parts of Cambridge. And I had to take a step back again and say, okay, I really love this HR thing. I think I can bring impact to it, but I need to do it in an industry that I feel passionate for, that I feel like, is helping the world. And so I worked really hard to get my first biotech job a couple of years into working. And I was very fortunate to get an HR generalist job at a company called Syntonix. And Syntonix was a very early stage drug delivery company at that point, who was struggling like biotechs do and startups do. And when I joined, we were about 40 people. When I left a couple of years later, we were about 100. And when I left, we had unfortunately not gotten the funding that we wanted, and we had to, make some tough decisions on the org design and the people components. And I remember going to my boss at the time, who's a very well-known HR leader in the industry, and I said, I think I'm going to go into agency recruiting. And she said, why would you do that? Basically, why do you go to the dark side, which is what HR people would refer to as external recruiters in the past. Why would you do that? Why do you want to, you're in HR, you're in biotech. Why would you want to go into agency recruiting? And I said, look, I really want to go steep myself in the biotech industry. And the best way to do that is to talk to as many different companies and as many different candidates as you possibly can to immerse yourself in what's going on in this industry. And I won't do it forever probably, but I think that's the best way for me to grow, both as an HR recruiting professional, but also, really steeped in understanding of the science, what's going on in the industry, what's going on with different companies. And so I joined up with somebody I'd worked with externally. He was a one-person show at that point with his own agency, and I asked to join him. And so it was just the two of us, and we were really all around Cambridge, working with probably smaller firms. One of them at the time being Alnylam, funny enough. Alnylam was founded in about 2002, and we were recruiting scientists for Alnylam in 2004, 2005, which is pretty cool. And I've watched Alnylam since then. And after about 3 years, I thought, okay, I love this recruiting thing. It's a great career. I loved working with my colleagues. But if I stay much longer in agency recruiting after 3 years, I probably won't be able to get back into HR to eventually be in the job that I'm in today. And so, that was a tough decision because I loved it so much, but I knew I had to do it for my career and where I wanted to go. And so I ended up getting a great role at CHRO Pharmaceuticals. And I thought at the time, CHRO was such an interesting choice. And I told them as much because CHRO had just bought this company called TKT, or Transkaryotic Therapies. I don't know if anybody remembers that company, but they were a company that had a really cool science and enzymatic replacement therapy for, these terrible rare diseases that start in children, that start, near birth. And so TKT had this great science, but what they didn't have money, they didn't have infrastructure, they were struggling on a leadership and agency perspective. And so CHRO, who had a lot of infrastructure and a lot of cash from their ADHD platform, acquired TKT and brought it into one company. And so you had kind of a specialty type of business and then a rare business. And I joined the rare business. Well, 10 years later, I was able to do a lot of different things at CHRO. I started in recruiting. I went in to be an HRBP for division and tech ops, and then I went in to be the HRBP for the entire company for tech ops. Then moved into working with corporate functions, the CFO, the CLO, the CHRO. And then I moved into doing a lot of M&A before I left. So a lot of smaller acquisitions, and then ultimately led the org design and talent decisions for the acquisition of Baxalta, when CHRO acquired Baxalta. So that was about a 25,000 person organizational design over, I don't know how many countries, 40 or 50 countries. So that was a really interesting and learning assignment for me before I took my first CHRO job at a medical device company called Abiomed. And Abiomed makes the world's smallest heart pump, short-term heart pump, and it's extraordinary technology that everybody should know about. And I was there for 2.5 years or so, and then got the call from Alnylam. And having watched Alnylam over those many years, I thought, this is early to take this call into my tenure, but you don't not pick up the call when Alnylam calls, I felt like at the time. And so I did that. And 5 years later, I'm thrilled that I did.
Well, thanks for kind of giving us the foundation here, Kelley. I mean, and sharing some amazing things here. We'd love to kind of ask a few questions, relative to what you shared. And it's a super, as I outlined in the intro, it's a really fascinating path. First, didn't realize how accomplished of a college athlete that you were. I mean, it's not oftentimes that Paul, who's an All-American and Hall of Famer at Tufts, is the third best athlete on the podcast. So that's pretty amazing. But it's interesting. One of the things that you shared that I thought was fascinating was, the first part about the work that you shared was just that you had an early mentor say, hey, you really have to truly know the business to be able to do this work, which has been a common theme that almost all your peers have shared on the previous episodes. But what is fascinating, and would love to kind of lean in here and ask the question, kind of around the same time you get that information, you make the decision to go from tech to life sciences, which there are some similarities as far as growth and kind of how companies move, but geez, there's also a lot of differences. Tell us, and you go on and tell us a little bit about your agency career and how you use that to kind of root yourself into the life sciences space in and around Boston. But tell us a little bit about that decision to go from tech to life sciences. You said, hey, I looked across the river and saw some really cool things happening. But how did you make that decision? Like, were you worried about it at all? Just kind of curious there.
When I look back at every decision I've made to make a move, every single one of them have been very difficult decisions for me. And I've always been not blindly ambitious or anything like that, but I've always taken great care of my career in terms of, okay, like I was so fortunate to get this role or this opportunity at Digitas. Why am I even considering something else? And it came back to this kind of pulling at my heart to say, I know now that I love this HR thing, and an advertising company is really fun too. And there's a lot, that was a .com boom and bomb. And it was a ton of fun, and I could have easily stayed there and continued to grow my career. But I just felt like if I'm going to work, and I'm going to work really hard, which I have always done, that it needs to be something of a real purpose for me. And I just didn't feel that purpose in advertising. I'm not saying you shouldn't or you can't. I just didn't. I didn't have that personal pull myself. And like I said, just in reading everything I could get my hands on of what's going on in Boston, it was clear that biotech was really becoming a real leader, and led by the likes of a Henry Tamir and that sort of thing, and really building out a very patient-centric industry, around biotech. Pharma, yes, but biotech being something slightly different, which tends to be slightly smaller, can tackle more disease, like rare diseases and that sort of thing. So I just decided one day, like I'm gonna go get a biotech job, and it's not easy because anybody who has tried or works in biotech knows that it can be a pretty homogeneous industry, and it's really hard to get into. So I was very fortunate that my second then mentor in my career at Syntonix gave me a shot. And I was so grateful for that. But she did the same thing. She said, look, you've got to learn this life science thing. So I want you to meet every single scientist at this company. Again, there was only 40 people at the time, but I want you to meet everybody from the first person at the Petri dish to the second people in the animal facility to then your QC folks and your manufacturing. And so I did that in sequence to really be able to learn the full product life cycle process. And that was very helpful to me. And that certainly gave me confidence to move into recruiting. And I have to tell you, 3 years sitting right in Cambridge with my mentor and colleague, Rob, and going out and meeting all of these companies, Alnylam and a lot of different smaller companies for the most part, understanding their ins and outs, right? So what's phenomenal about them, maybe what their scientific drivers are, but also cultural drivers and leadership drivers. When you're hiring for somebody, they really want you and need you to know the essence of their culture and the cultural add that will bring to their organization. And so people really want to talk about their company. So I learned a lot from just sitting down with the hiring managers or the CEOs of these companies and finding out what drives them and what they are looking for out of talent. And then conversely, with candidates, I never submitted a candidate to a company who I'd never met. And we didn't have Zoom back then. So I was out coffees and lunches all the time. And we were purely referral based. Like, we didn't really use job boards or anything like that. It was really about getting referrals from people that we trusted. And I think that was a big differentiator as well. And so you sit down and you talk to them, these candidates who love their work, they're passionate about what they do, and you learn so much from them as well. So that 3 years, in addition to being so much fun and learning so much from my mentor, Rob, was, instrumental in steeping myself, I felt like, in the biotech space.
Yeah. And it kind of begs the question, Kelley, like, and like so many of your peers, I think you, in describing some of these things, you really, you make it seem pretty easy and compared to maybe how hard it was. And, here's an assumption. You originally wanted to be a lawyer. You went to Cornell, right? Ivy League. Paul's a small Ivy guy. I'm an Ivy adjacent person, but, assuming that you are an academic at some level, but you basically were learning the HR function and learning a new industry kind of, in parallel, in lockstep. Was there any, outside of the scientists and the folks that you immerse yourself in meeting, was there any, were you grabbing every periodical you could find? Were you reading articles about pipelines? Like, tell us a little bit about that process, because it's fascinating to jump from one to another and have relative quick success there.
It's a great question. And yes, I mean, I made it very clear to anybody I worked with that I wanted to learn as much from them as I possibly could. And I read anything I could get my hands on. In fact, I told you about the software engineering dictionary. That was like a big paper dictionary. My boss and mentor at Syntonix shared a biotech or scientific online dictionary. And so I was constantly on that. If I'm, as a generalist, I was doing everything, right? In a tiny company, you're recruiting, you're doing benefits, you're doing all the admin stuff. And so, I'd be looking at resumes and saying, is this resume a fit for this job? And because there's all these acronyms I didn't know about and all these, scientific terms, I've never been even close to a scientist. And so I was just constantly referring to that and constantly teaching myself. And look, people love, if you're interested in the work that they do or what they care about, they love to talk about it and they love to teach you. So that kind of humble ambition, I felt like, was very helpful to me. And I think the other thing that was very helpful to me was taking very quick accountability for when I made mistakes, as opposed to, trying to run from them or hide from them or anything like that. I mean, I would be the first person to admit, I think in all my roles, even today, when I've made a mistake or when I've, not done right by somebody, and come clean about that. Because I think that's another major form of learning, taking accountability, owning it, figuring out what you can learn from it, and sharing with others wherever possible.
Yeah, and appreciate you saying that. And then kind of the next step, and I didn't know this. I mean, shame on me. We've chatted about your background, and I've done the obligatory LinkedIn stalking. But I guess I didn't realize you had a substantial time on the agency side in recruiting. And you said the term homogeneous relative to life sciences. It is, and I would argue it still is kind of a little community, especially in Cambridge and Boston. Tell us a little bit, did your mentor there, were they already well connected in that space? If they were, like, how did you break in? I mean, Paul and I, our day job, we're consultants, and we help businesses with insurance. And I know I could tell you firsthand that, like, you're in or you're out. You know what I mean? Tell us a little bit about, how that went from the agency side.
On the agency side? Well, it's a funny story, actually. And if Rob, my friend now, would watch this, he'll chuckle. So I was 26 years old, and I decided I was going to go into agency recruiting, having done a little bit of recruiting on the inside, never having done it from the outside. And I said, I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to open my own recruiting agency. 26 years old, never, And so I reached out to my friend Rob, who I felt did it right. I felt like he was a recruiter who, again, knew the science, knew the companies, was passionate about the industry, and it was also a very seasoned recruiter. Like, he had been in an agency his whole life and was taught, in these agencies, you're taught very formally how to recruit, how many calls you have to make, And so I set up lunch with Rob at a Starbucks in Brookline and said, I'm going to start my own recruiting agency. Like, what advice can you give me? He's like, okay, why don't you come join me before you go start your own thing? Because I think I can help you be successful. And what I learned there is, recruiting is a sales job, right? I mean, you're trying to find the most talented candidates. You're trying to get business from the best companies and merge the two. And you have to influence along the way. And I mean that in a very genuine way, an authentic way. I don't mean it in an inauthentic way, but you have to really find the right matches and make sure that each other sees all both sides of, the opportunity. And so I learned that in terms of how to read people, how to, be able to adjust my style as needed to be able to influence different personality types. Somebody who's a more quiet type and is a more analytical type is going to be a very different conversation and a very different influence than somebody who's a driver and just wants to make the decisions themselves. And Rob really taught me that. That was one of the major things that he taught me in that world. And I just think it made me so much better. And again, it wasn't a natural path. My boss at Syntonix was very surprised that I was taking this path. But I for some reason, I felt in me like this is going to make me better in the long term.
And to that end, Kelley, was there a certain point at the end of your agency time? Was there something, a lighthouse or a buoy or a beacon that said it's time to jump back into, a practicing role? Like, tell us a little bit about the decision to jump back into the corporate side.
I have to say it was mostly timing. And as you know, recruiting cycles can be up and down. You can be doing really well, and then you can be not doing well, and doing really well, not doing well. And so, I felt like at 3 years, I don't know. I had to look in the mirror and say, if I stay in agency much longer, will I be considered to go back inside? Right? I don't know. And so I don't want to lose that opportunity. So at that point, I just started networking a bit. I don't know if I sent any applications or anything, but I started networking and I reached out to the head of HR at Shire and a few other places, and was fortunate enough to get a great role at Shire and then have, amazing development opportunities there over the next 10 years or so.
In two more questions here, Kelley, and then we'll kind of chat about the ascension kind of into the CHRO role at Abiomed. It's interesting. A lot of folks that come on have a certain HR superpower, right? And then they kind of build out the other elements of the function. And, if I were to look at my notes here in the conversation so far, I mean, I think the easy one would say, geez, the person did agency recruiting for life sciences, so it must be recruiting in TA. But you could argue with your approach to the work early on that it's like, I would argue it's more HR business partner approach to actually partnering from a business perspective. And, I know they all kind of, eventually kind of touch each other, but like what superpower would you say was yours? Was it HRBP? Was it TA? Was it something different when you first started?
It's a good question. And I hadn't thought about that way, but as I think about it, when you asked the question, it was really more point in time and what I was able to learn and leverage along the way. So I think the recruiting experience helped me tremendously. I started in recruiting at Shire, and we were doing a major manufacturing build, and that was so exciting to be able to lead that with a group of people. And we had to, because we were going from like kind of targeted surgical recruiting for niche jobs to high volume new manufacturing facility, we had to do it a completely different way. We had to do it in a high volume way, which I had never done before. And so really had to bring the recruiting team together and say, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fill 100 jobs in 3 months and get them up and trained and get them going? Because this is what the business needs. They're building the manufacturing site in a very innovative and creative way so that they can parallel track the building of it and the testing of it. And so we need to do the same. We need to parallel track the building of the team and the interviewing of the team at a high volume. So we just completely changed the way we recruit, the way we were sourcing, the way we were interviewing, and ended up hitting these metrics that the business was really excited about because they just didn't think we could do it because we had never recruited that way before. So I learned a lot there, but then was super excited to move into that HRBP opportunity because, again, I think it sounds like you've heard it from other guests, but when you are somebody who is driven by the business and driven by business results and the strategy and the science and the financials, an HRBP job is like where you want to be, right? It's so much fun. You have influence, you have the hearts and minds of your leaders, and you're not only hearing what's going on the ground, but then you're able to translate that up to people who may not hear it from their own people. You know what I mean? So you kind of have to help bring that reality in both sides. And so, yeah, I loved that world. And, I think it's made me a better HR professional, but I would say do anything you can do outside of your realm of comfort. When I was asked to lead an organizational component of my first merger at Shire did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. It was nerve-wracking to me. It was highly visible. I'd never done it before. I said to my husband, I'm either going to do really well at this or I'm going to get fired. but that's okay. Either way, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it and run with it. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot over those, multiple acquisitions that we did, and not just about acquisitions, but org design and talent selections and, leadership and speed, speed versus perfection. I would just say to anybody, if you get an opportunity, or even better yet, drive the opportunity for yourself to do new things and just learn, laterally versus trying to go up a ladder all the time.
And last question while we're here, Kelley, I can see Paul rolling his eyes at me. I can get kind of stuck in the weeds here, but a lot of this is so fascinating. In staying on the sports analogies that you started off with, and I don't know this to be true, but I'm just going off of my observations over the last, say, 5 years of chatting with a lot of your peers. It seems like Shire is one of those organizations like a Pepsi or a GE, right? That like the coaching tree. I think of like Bill Walsh and Bill Parcells in the NFL. Like it seems like anybody that ever worked for those guys ended up going off and getting a head coaching job somewhere. And when I see Shire, it seems like so many folks in the life science space in Cambridge and Boston that are leading teams now have a connection there. Is that a real thing, or is that just something I'm kind of dreaming up here?
I mean, I think it's a real thing. I think about the talent in general, but then I'll say specific to the HR talent at Shire. Sometimes you don't know it when you're in it, but when you look back, I mean, the tremendous talent and the amount of change, the welcome of change that HR had, and the drivers of change that HR were at Shire, because there was so many reorgs, there were so many acquisitions. In order to thrive at Shire, you had to be very change agile. You had to be comfortable with change. You had to be comfortable with organizational change. You had to be comfortable with sometimes, sending difficult messages, whether it's a reorg and like, yes, not everybody's going to be here in 6 months, the reality of that. But I think what we all learned from that is we all are going to have to make difficult business decisions. That's the jobs that we do, no matter what level, but particularly at our levels. But if you do it with transparency and kindness and respect, people can understand difficult business decisions that need to get made. It's the way you treat people along the way that's going to determine whether the people who are leaving the company or people who are staying at the company, and see how other people who are leaving the company being treated. If you're treating people with transparency, kindness, and respect, and helping them transition on to what their next thing may be, Shire was really good at proactive development. I think that's why you see so many, C-level people, whether it be in HR or finance or commercial or wherever it may be. The company was really good at proactively moving people around and getting them different experiences abroad, different experiences in different groups of the company. And I certainly benefited from that. And many others did as well, which is why we see so many C-level folks in the industry from Shire, I think. And Shire also, early stages then, when we were doing our high-level talent reviews and succession planning, we would be looking at gender equity. We would be looking at race and diversity amongst our talent and really striving towards that. And that was back in, 2012 or so, 2011, 2012. So I think for companies of that size, playing a role ahead of the game in that way of what's important in having a diverse group in general, but a diverse leadership as well.
Yeah, it's been super cool. Again, I obviously didn't know that background, but we've been fortunate enough to see some of, you and your former teammates, on calls or at events, and you can just kind of tell there's a collegiality there of like, you've been on the same team, you played in some great and tough games together. You can kind of just see it pretty organically. So it's neat to hear kind of the context behind it.
Team building things are great, but being in the trenches in some really difficult situations together and figuring it the right way out together is, I feel like, so much more of a connection. And we had a lot of that. We had a lot of that at Shire.
Well, Kelley, you kind of, talked a little bit about the transition to your first number one or CHRO role at Abiomed. Can you tell us a little bit about, you said, you started getting some calls, and like, tell us a little bit about the decision to take that role. And I guess more specifically, there are some folks that say, hey, I never want to be a CHRO. That role is so broad and so responsible for so many different things. I'm very much happy in my, XYZ, center of excellence position or whatnot. Tell us a little bit about the thought process relative to that position and making that jump.
I had been a Shire for 10 years at that point, and I certainly wasn't taking many calls, but this one at Abiomed intrigued me, and it intrigued me for a couple of reasons. One, they had this life-saving, cutting edge technology in this, it's called an Impella. It's the world's smallest heart pump. But basically you insert it through your femoral artery, it comes into the left ventricle of your heart. It takes over pumping for your heart. Like if you're having a severe heart attack or you're just really sick that a doctor won't do a procedure on you. And it's incredible. So I was intrigued by that. I'd never heard of it before. The management team was very experienced, had clearly done some amazing things, and it would teach me how to be a CHRO. And so I was fortunate to get that job and learn a lot. For those of us who don't have direct executive comp experience moving into the CHRO role, that's probably the greatest anxiety, certainly that I had, and I think others have who aren't executive comp folks or compensation folks, is now you're like heading up the executive comp for the CEO, for the CFO. And if you don't know that world, it's a lot to learn, and it's technical and it can get complicated. And so that was my main focus coming into the role. I knew I could do the HRBP work. I knew I could do the recruiting work. I knew I could do the benefits, whatnot. But it was at executive compensation. So the first thing I did is reach out to my old colleague at Shire and said, can you please give me some tutorials here and, help me understand just what I don't even understand yet. And that was incredibly helpful. It gave me a lot of confidence in that role, and, very successful stint and great company. But, and when I say I pick up the phone for Alnylam was the only company I would have picked up the phone for. I mean, I'd watched the company since I recruited for them back in the day and just thought, man, if they can make this RNAi technology work, they're going to change the face of medicine. And that's what we're doing here today. So very fortunate to get that call and very fortunate to have 5 years here where culture is king. You're blessed to have a scientific platform that can make more and more medicines for patients around the world for both rare diseases and specialty. And that's amazing. And if we didn't pay so much attention to the culture, and if the CEOs that have been here while I've been here hadn't cared and put so much effort and leverage into leadership and culture, we wouldn't be as successful as we are. And so the culture continues to be a real driver of Alnylam's success, which is, wonderful to be in a job like this when that's the case.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of bringing us up to current, Kelley. And the question, and it's might be a little theoretical, but I've been really curious on your answer to it. You've been at some well-known public companies, and that's different than being at a private company. It's different than being at a family-owned company, and a lot hinges on the marketplace, on some regulation. There's a lot of different dynamics, kind of, I would say, externally that factor into the performance of the business. Tell us a little bit about that, like navigating that, but still being the steward of that culture that I can tell you're so proud of. Like that seems like it might be a delicate dance sometimes.
I mean, the success rate of programs in the biotech pharma industry is like less than 10%. So you guys know it takes probably, 10 years to develop a drug, to get it approved, to get to patients, billions of dollars, clinical trials, it's such a long, arduous, costly effort to do it right, because it is highly regulated. It should be highly regulated. And so there be so many ups and downs of just you being so excited about a program, the program not working, or excited about a program, but maybe there's really no market for it. And so again, Alnylam is very fortunate to have this RNA interference platform, which we can continue to leverage and optimize for a lot of different spaces. But, it's unique to our industry, the failure rates. And so what you're seeing now is you're seeing a lot of the smaller biotechs, the funding is drying up a bit. People aren't investing as much. They're having to lay off because when things don't succeed, you have to take those drastic measures sometimes. And that's what's happening in biotech right now. There's a lot of startups that have been funded and who are struggling. And for those of us who may not even be struggling, it of course affects us and our stock price. And so you can't make it about that. You've got to take people out of that mindset of like short-term thought on that kind of financial success and say, look, at the long term, we're going to be here. The long term, we look at our pipeline, we look at our success rate, and the long term, we're going to get back and way above where we are today. And continuing that focus and getting people off that soapbox of stock price, because it's such a short-term thought, and it's truly meant to be a long-term measure. And
to that point, Kelley, it's interesting. I somewhat made a joke early on. I'm not an academic. I read a lot. But my mom, God rest her soul, I tell her I just read so I can stay, I can stay up to speed with just, the normal, Janes and Joes of the world. But, it's interesting. You read a lot of, life science organizations that, for whatever reason, that failure is the wrong word, but, the news that something's not approved or something doesn't make it. And it seems, at least from a media standpoint, like so finite. It's such like an outcome. And I know we're in business, right? So there is that, but you again, I'm just speaking personally, you feel so bad because of all of the people involved in the will and the in the work leading up to the opportunity to perhaps do something groundbreaking. And it seems like that's lost on a lot of people because we are so quick just to read a headline. So I appreciate you kind of giving us some grounding in that it's not just about the stock price or all that stuff.
Yeah, and that recently happened to us. We had an application in for a new indication of a drug that's already on the market, a bigger indication for us. We had the clinical trial design approved. We hit our endpoints. We did an AdCom, which is a term what the FDA holds. And the AdCom voted that we should get approved. And the day the FDA decided that we shouldn't be approved. And we didn't get approved for that indication for that product that's already on the market. It's heartbreaking because you think about all the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that. And we felt like we did everything right. And sometimes it just doesn't go your way. And again, what we have to do, what Yvonne does and the leadership team does, is let's get up, dust ourselves off. We need to look at the long term here. This is a short-term setback. It's not going to affect our business in the medium to long term. Look at these amazing things we have ahead of us to, secure the future of the business. And people kind of got right up and heard that message, got on board with that message, and looked forward on to 2024, which is what we're doing now. So you have to be resilient in this business or it's not going to be the business for you.
Well, thanks for sharing. And just coming up on the back end of the conversation here, we always like to kind of move into the future. If you don't mind, Kelley, tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about the work, right? HR and people leadership, relative to moving into the next few years. How are you thinking about it personally?
So, I think there's a couple of different components that we need to look at. One is molding and developing the futures of the leader that truly see that nurturing your culture is going to, coupled with your science and your hard work and your passion and your talent, is going to fuel your future. And so, I would say to especially those smaller companies that are starting up, start with your culture, start with your values, make them authentic, bring them to life every day, because that will be a differentiator in terms of how much effort people give you, how much passion and dedication they have, and how much resilience for the long term that they have. So I think that's a really important component of a successful company, even just starting up, and maintaining that throughout the years. It'll evolve, your culture will evolve, your values will evolve, but to have those and have them be the center of conversations whenever you get together is really important. On the HR structure end, you need to be able to scale your organization. And so your smaller, medium-sized companies, you're just kind of heads down, getting things done, rolling up your sleeves, and no job is too small. You do get to a point where you need to scale your business. You can't just keep hiring people and you can't just keep adding to manual processes. You truly need structure, infrastructure, org design, and system enablement to really be able to scale your HR organization to the next level. And so that's what I would say. Think about that early. Think about that not when you're 100 people, but certainly when you're getting to be 500 people or 1,000 people. Think about how you're truly leveraging infrastructure systems and org design to meet the new needs of the business that are coming in the future, which are going to be a lot faster. They're going to be AI driven. They're going to be, we're really going to have to manage what AI means to org design and talent and how we're coupling the two. You hear a lot about people worried about losing their jobs with AI. Well, there's something real about that. But then how do you pivot to work differently so that you can leverage both your human talent and your artificial talent together to just make us work smarter, faster, better?
Yeah, and I appreciate you going there, Kelley. We'll put you a little bit on the spot here. Relative to AI and HR, it sounds like your last comment, there's two sides of the coin. How do you feel about it? Is it going to be something amazing that a lot of folks are already utilizing? Is it going to be something that we're going to have to kind of temper, that it's not a solution, it's a tool? Like what does Kelley Boucher think about AI relative to the work?
I think it's inevitable and it's going to be really helpful. But it has to be measured in how we start implementing it. So for instance, right now, we're just beefing up our HR shared services. So, our call center, our email center, our systems and whatnot. And so, our call center, our email center will have a bot. Once we teach it all of the things and we give it all of our materials that we've built ourselves, the policies we built, the practices we built, the processes we built, whatever it is, we teach the bot that, and then we let the bot go on its way and we watch it, we measure it, when we adjust as needed. And that's how we'll do this AI thing. We'll put it in place in a safe way, in a monitored way. We'll see how it's doing. We'll learn from it. It'll learn from us. And then we'll adjust and keep growing. But it's inevitable, and I think going to be really useful and help from an efficiency perspective.
Yeah, and I appreciate your thought on that, putting me on the spot there. And then a last question here, Kelley. This has been a lot of fun. Paul and I and Hunter and Jen with the Boston HR Council, we've had the good fortune of running a whole bunch of events and virtual calls and putting HR content out into the world. And as such, we've kind of helped build this HR following in New England. And there's a lot of your peers, but there's also a lot of folks that are just starting in HR. And I think we've somewhat done a little bit of a disservice in the sense that we chat with a lot of folks that are earlier on in their career that might have saw an event or a talk that you've done with us and say, hey, Sean, that Kelley Boucher, she's really cool. Can you connect me? Like, I'd love to kind of, be the HR leader of a high powered, biotech in Boston. And it's almost like we've made the bridge really small to the work and, in a number one role, if you will. Like, any advice for folks that are earlier on in their career that think they might be interested in leading a team like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it before. I would say be as curious and humble as you can possibly be and take advantage of every opportunity that you see that comes your way that you can create, even if possible. And also, like, always be asking for feedback. Always be asking for how can I be better? Because it's so simple and it sounds very cliche, but I mean, feedback is a gift. It's if somebody is willing and courageous enough to give you feedback that's going to help you get better and help you achieve what you want to achieve. You know what I mean? If somebody wants to be a CHRO and somebody is willing to sit down with them and say, hey, this is where you are today. This is where you need to be as a CHRO. These are the things you need to do to get there. I mean, what's better than that? That's a recipe to get to where you want to go. And if somebody's willing to provide that to you, have your ears open, digest it, and really learn and action against it.
Yeah, that's unbelievable advice, Kelley. And then I'll just kind of ask one more question relative to that. Like, when you talked about your first transition to your first CHRO role, you kind of, oh, by the way, so I was at Shire for 10 years. Like maybe help us normalize or at least socialize the thought process relative to time and what that means, the value there.
Mm-hmm. A mentor I had at Shire at one point said, you can't do everything all at the same time. I just had maybe my first child. I have two. Just had my first child, and I said, oh, I need to get back out there and network again. I haven't been doing any networking. And he's like, Kelley, like, there's a time and a place. And this may not be the time that you need to be the world's best networker right now. And so my 10 years at Shire, it was, in the recruiting function at first, I got the opportunity to move into an HRBP role. And I have to say, I only got that role because somebody from the business fought for me to get that role. The person that I had done well by on the recruiting side wanted me to be his HRBP because I had proven myself and whatnot. And he really fought for me. And then, through the years, I felt like anytime I was like, is it time to pick up a phone call? Shire would put something really cool in front of me. So I think that's a great lesson just in terms of proactively developing talent the talent needs to develop themselves. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't just sitting there waiting for something to be plopped on my desk, but Shire was very smart and very good at proactively moving people around, giving different opportunities, a lot of lateral moves instead of upward moves. I had more lateral moves than I had promotional moves in my 10 years there. And, once I had my children and kind of got back on track, then I was able to take another new job at Shire when I was able to kind of grow that capacity. So there's also time and place for things.
Well, thanks for leaning in a little bit more there, Kelley. And thanks so much for coming on today. Your journey is super fascinating. And I know the BHRC community is going to be super thankful when they're able to hear this.
Awesome. Well, I love the opportunity. Always love speaking with the two of you and seeing you at events.
So I will look forward to seeing you more in 2024.
Sounds good. Take care. Happy New Year, everyone.